Okay, friends, let's get some answers to these first 6 questions in this class notes set 3, creating and interpreting graphs. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at these first few. We got a nice little graph here. It's called a bar graph, just like it's indicated up here. And a bar graph really simply is just showing data along the horizontal. We call that the independent variable very often. And then the dependent variable in this case is number of students who turned in their journal on that date on the vertical. So it's kind of like if you've ever taken like an algebra class, the XY coordinate plane. Very, very similar to that. Very similar. Okay, so let's go through these questions here. How many students turned in journal number 4? All right, so journal number 4, this is all about journal number 4. So you've got students that turned it in, it looks like on January 26th. They also, some turned it in on January 27th, January 28th, and so forth. February 1st is the last date they could have turned it in. I bet you that was a Friday because that's when my journals used to be due. So how many students turned it in? Well, let's figure it out. We got 1 here, 2 more here, so that's 3, plus 2 more, that's 5, plus 2 more, that's 7, plus 2 more, that's 9, plus 5 more, that's 14. 14 in total, assuming that we're counting each person one time. So 14 in total. What percent turned in the journal on January 26th? 1 person out of 14. Now, this is one of those, I don't know why I have this in my head, but I know that's about 7%. Now, I don't know why I have that in my head. I think it's from years of doing math. But if you need a percentage, you can just go to your buddy and mine, Google, and type 1 divided by 14, and it will tell you that it's about 7% right there. All right. What percent turned in the journal on January 31st? January 31st. January 31st. Aha! None. 0% turned it in on January 31st. All right. What percent turned in the journal in January? In January completely. Okay, so you've got 5 in February, the first day of February. So that means we have, let me see, we had 14 people, right? So that's 9 left that did it in January. So that's 9/14. I'm going to guess that's somewhere around 65%, but let's get a little more precision than that. Let's do 9 divided by 14. And that's about 64%. There we go. It wasn't too far off. About roughly 2/3 of them. Roughly 2/3. All right, good. 64%. What percent turned in the journal in February? Well, actually, this is nice. If we know that 64% turned it in January, whatever's left to get back to 100% must have turned it in February. So that's going to be 36% approximately. You can also do 5 divided by 14. That'll work as well. Okay, now this is probably my favorite question of the batch so far. If you had to pick a typical turn-in date for this journal, which date would you pick and why? And my favorite part about this is there really isn't a correct answer. The reason I put typical in quotes is because typical is a word that statisticians use all the time. You've probably heard the word average thrown around quite a bit in your life. What's the average turn-in date? Well, the problem with that is, how would you measure the average of this data? I mean, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could say, okay, well, call this 0 for 0 days before it's due, 1 day before it's due, 2 days before it's due, 3 days before it's due, and then average how many of those we have. It really depends on how you define typical, and that's what I'm getting at. You might say to yourself, well, typical would be the date that the most students turn things in which case you'd probably say February 1st, because 5 out of 14, or roughly 1/3 of the class, turned in their journals on that day. Totally fine. But you might also define typical as, well, this was the earliest one was turned in. This was the latest one was turned in. If I go somewhere in the middle, I'm going to call this typical. So I'm going to call 29th of January typical. It really just depends on how you define typical. So I'm not looking for any one particular answer in number 6. Number 6 is one of my favorite kind of math 98 questions because it makes you think outside the box of 2 + 2 = 4. It's how do you communicate ideas to people? And the most important thing, I think, is make sure that whoever you're talking to has the same idea of the words as you do. Okay, I hope that helped, and let's move on to the next few.